All right. Shout out and general topic video. So yeah. First I'd like to give the shout out. Thank you to my patrons. Thank you everybody, of course, but special thanks to all of my patrons: Michael Patton, Brett, Jeremy Elder, Alexis, uh, Pavilis Tamasauskas, Frederick LeMay, Tyler Smith, Jonas Sandiger, Alexi Sherebakau, Brendan Hopgood, Jeff Clark, Adam Boyd, Gabriel W., Rodrigo Tomazi, Andrew Watts, Yuha Landinoja, Brad Rispone, Sergey Perez Casas, Lucas Frank, Simon Grondin, Andre Sam Sambayazi, I think I'm pronouncing that correct, Greasy Choir Boy, Rick, Spencer, and new patron. Well, actually, I think Rick and Spencer might be new since last shout out video, but also new patron, Creepshow. Thank you, everybody. It's definitely much appreciated. Yeah, so let's get to the general topic. But before I do, I just want to mention that I have some new leagues recorded for those who are patrons and are following the new uploads. I've been trying to make the uploads pretty regularly when I record the leagues, but there's just always some lag time because I have to my video editing software makes it so that I have to I basically have to record each section individually, and then I have to combine it all in a video editing tool later on, and then I have to upload it all to YouTube, title it, put the timestamps, all that stuff. So, so if I'm running a little bit behind, I do apologize, but yeah, and also this week I think I'm gonna do just a basic kind of what am I playing now with just a little bit of strategy sprinkled in. I will be getting back to the more in-depth strategy videos hopefully next week. There were some excellent suggestions from last week. Just a combination of personal stuff, but I mean, like basically, a lot of it was also just a lot of experimentation with the new format, getting a feel for how the format was, since the new set dropped. So I've been a little bit behind on the on I guess the other stuff. So yeah, so I think the broad strategy kind of theme here is just kind of like why do I play certain cards, I guess, in my particularly in my sideboards, and why do we see them recur in multiple different decks? And yeah, so I guess we'll start off with with the deck that I think I'm most known for. Obosh Red. This is pretty much the last list I think I 5-0'd with, if I'm not mistaken. It's pretty much the last list I at least I have posted on Patreon. The only difference is I want to try out one of Fiery Islet. I know I've tried it out before. I know for some reason I oscillate between playing them and not, because it's kind of marginal. Sometimes they really help, sometimes they damage you and you lose the game because of it. So like it kind of goes both ways. But I'm not gonna lie, just I've been kind of liking just having an even number of basics in all of my decks. So I think this is kind of the most obvious one of type of card I can play. I could play I could play Castle Embereth, but the problem is with 10 basic islands, I just feel like it's not necessarily guaranteed to come into play tapped. I mean, it is most likely for the most part, but if it comes into play tapped, it's just not really where I want to be, especially considering that Blood Moon's just going to shut it off. But yeah, so first of all, I guess the common sideboard here that we're going to be seeing a lot in my sideboards is Chalice of the Void. I mean, this is pretty much the list, yeah, that I'm on. So Chalice of the Void is actually a card that I've been noticing I've been liking a lot in all of my sideboards, because really Here's the thing: Chalice of the Void shores up a number of difficult matchups as long as you're not too all in on one drops. You can also, like, honestly, you could bring it in just against Cascade and it'd still be pretty good. But the fact that you can also bring it in some matchups, at one, means that it's pretty flexible. And of course, here in this deck, in mono red Obosh, you can put it on 2. Since the deck is an Obosh deck, it basically doesn't have anything in the 2-drop slot. So Chalice on 2 is pretty free if you can get there. It's great against Storm. It's great against some other decks, like, including Merfolk. Unfortunately for our Merfolk, our beloved Merfolk tribe. But yeah, I've basically added Chalice of the Void to all of my sideboards in all of my decks except for Infect, just because there are 2 main pillars of the format. I mean, there are 2 pillars of the format that you kind of need, that almost everybody needs hate for. Basically, it's Cascade and Burn, and Chalice is the only card I know of that hoses both pretty well. It also has incidental splash damage against some other decks. So, and like I just like Chalice enough that I think it's even worth losing Obosh for in some matchups, just because there's not a lot of cards that really give you this kind of crossover application. Anyway, not much more to say about the Obosh deck, because this has one of the most specialized sideboards, which I go over in my videos on the Obosh red archetype. So then let's get maybe to the deck that I'm second most famous for, probably, mono blue Merfolk. And yes, for those who have been following me on Twitter, I dabbled briefly with a main deck Chalice version, with actually replacing the Aether Vials with Chalice of the Void. I've been back on Aether Vial. I don't know that my results have been all that different. It's just I just started getting some really funky mana screw hands where, like, I didn't draw enough mana and it just felt really bad. And I don't feel like going up to 28 lands is the way to go, especially since sometimes I get mana flooded. So, Aether Vial is obviously been a mainstay in the deck for a long time. So, cutting it was probably worth the experiment. But its ability to help us cheat on mana, and also, we can get more use out of our utility lands if like we can cycle Lonely Sandbar more and whatnot if we've got an Aether Vial taking care of our creature needs. Anyway, but the main point, of course, I'm going over here is the sideboard tech that I use in this deck. And of course, this is, and also, I guess, to briefly show what I've been playing. I've actually been playing a lot of this weekend. I've been playing a lot of this, and I've been playing a lot of mono white, and I've been playing a bit of Infect as well. But yeah, as you can see, Chalice is also in this deck's sideboard. It's been in the Merfolk sideboard for the longest time, because we essentially don't play any 1-drops. It could even be main deck. It's the only deck of ours that we play that we could main deck Chalice, but it's just the format's just not necessarily always soft to Chalice. But yeah, I already discussed Chalice a lot in the Obosh Red discussion, so I'll just briefly touch, I guess, now on Relic of Progenitus. We'll see this a lot, actually. The only reason we didn't actually see this in the mono red Obosh sideboard is because this was actually in the main deck for mono red Obosh. This could be main decked in Merfolk, but Merfolk, of course, is unique in that we're heavily incentivized to obviously play more Merfolk if possible. So Relic, it's a little hard to squeeze Relic in the main. Plus, we've got a lot of other ways to draw cards. But yeah, Relic has been a mainstay for me in most of my decks, because it's just really one of the best graveyard hate cards out there. It only costs 1 mana. Now, of course, you can't blow up an entire graveyard the same turn that you play it. But for only 1 more mana, so as early as turn 2, you can blow up both players' graveyards. And most of my decks don't actually go all in on their graveyard, so being able to blow up both graveyards is pretty powerful, particularly against Tarmogoyf. But there's other decks that care about your graveyard, like, for example, John of the Lock. Like, John of the Lock, if you crack Relic of Progenitus in response to John of the Lock, unless they can put 1, 2, 3 more cards into your graveyard, before it resolves, a lot of times it's kind of like counter Drown of the Lock, draw a card. And also Drown of the Lock decks a lot of times incidentally use the graveyard, like for Luris, or they play Croxa or something, so you still want to hit their graveyard if you can. And it's just really nice that Relic can hit all graveyards, because some decks actually kind of rely on you having a graveyard. And we don't necessarily need a graveyard. So, yeah, I'm not sure what else to say about Relic other than that. Yeah, I mean, it's very powerful, but also it draws a card. I guess that's the probably one of the most key parts of this card, because that means that it's basically at worst just a 2-mana cantrip that you can spread the mana investment over 2 different turns. That to me makes means that a Relic of Progenitus is almost a no-brainer graveyard hate card, unless, for example, like Infect is the only deck that I would be very likely to play a different graveyard hate card, because the Infect deck doesn't quite the Infect deck is trying to get turn 2 and turn 3 kills, so like Relic is not necessarily where it wants to be. And I guess I'll show the Infect deck quick. This is the and it's changed a bit, which I guess I'll go over in a second. But yeah. So actually, there's we're not using Relic of Progenitus in the Infect deck. The main reason, of course, in this particular build is that we are relying on Bojuka Bog and Scavenger Ground, our two utility lands on the sideboard, to do the heavy lifting in the graveyard. But that's because we're playing Sylvan Scrying, and that means that we can get a lot of mileage out of just 2 sideboard slots. If we weren't playing these particular cards, I'd be heavily incentivized, I think, to play something like Tormod's Crypt or Surgical Extraction instead of Relic of Progenitus, because we don't necessarily care too much about getting late game value. We really just want to make sure that we either race decks, the few decks that are faster than us or that are about the same speed, or we just want to make sure that we don't spend any mana, basically. And of course, lands technically don't cost any mana. They do cost mana if you have to play Sylvan Scrying, but at least it's worth it. But yeah, Sylvan Scrying obviously changes things a little bit. It's just like here I'm just playing these two particular cards because of Sylvan Scrying, essentially because of the particular makeup of my sideboard, which actually that takes me to the next to the next segue. I mean, I'm segueing to the next topic. But just to wrap up the discussion about graveyard hate, my Infect deck is definitely the most different of all my decks, and yeah, I'm more interested in graveyard effects that cost little or no mana than I am ones that can deal with everything and draw a card, just because of the nature of how Infect works and where its wins basically come from the most. But yeah, that segues into kind of how I build my sideboard, and I think this Infect deck is a good case study in what exactly is going on here with this particular sideboard. So Infect is vulnerable to a few things. Infect is vulnerable to, this particular version especially, is vulnerable to Pithing Needle, because we essentially have 8 Inkmoth Nexi. We've got Inkmoth Nexus and then 4 Sylvan Scryings to find them, or other cards if need be, but Sylvan Scrying, but Inkmoth Nexus in particular. So I find Wilt to be a particularly good card for this deck, and the reason why I like Wilt as opposed to other options is that Wilt allows me to bring in artifact and enchantment hate in the blind. And that's important because basically any deck can play a Pithing Needle type effect, which can really do a lot of damage to us. And of course, to some extent there may be a certain Sixth Sense element, because we're not necessarily always bringing Wilt in the blind against every single matchup. But if we got some kind of inkling like they might bring it in, then Wilt is pretty good, because even if we guess wrong, we can still cycle it, which is pretty critical. And that's one reason why I like Wilt instead of Seal of Primordium. Let's see. I've been liking Seal Primordium in the past, but This has good synergy with Lurrus because you can keep bringing it back, but I still prefer Wilt because again, just being able to cycle if they don't actually have an artifact or enchantment worth destroying is pretty huge in a deck that kind of has to string together a win. And the longer the game goes, a lot of times the more unfavored you are. So we don't want to necessarily get stuck with an anti-hate card like this if they're not presenting it. Sometimes we just got to cycle into like a pump spell or something and try to go for the win. Yeah. Also, so Sorcerer Spyglass is a concession, like in this particular deck, to to basically cards like Azmoran, and even more so Yawgmoth, Thran Physician. Cards like that. Oh yeah, and Mayhem Devil. Like whenever a player sacrifice. Let me see. Yeah, this card's just a nightmare because the thing, it doesn't even cost mana. It can just, as long as they've got enough creatures, which the decks that play it basically always do. It just machine guns down all our creatures and becomes basically impossible to ever get through damage. And it's even negative on counters. So so even if we pump it, it'll die. It'll die later on. So against a deck with a lot of 1/1s, this is definitely pretty lethal. We got to be able to stop it, and ideally, just prevent it from even having its ability able to be used. Yeah, Mayhem Devil is another card that, like, as we see more Asmo food decks and whatnot that, you know, sacrifice permanents, this card is pretty nasty. Whenever they crack a fetch land, whenever they just sacrifice, you know, a food token, anything really, this card deals 1 damage to any target. Obviously, in a 1 toughness deck again, this can be pretty damaging. What was another card I mentioned? Oh yeah, Asmo, of course. Yeah, just again, it gets that Underworld Cookbook, keeps making food tokens. You know, 1 mana, like it keeps getting, yeah, I guess. Yeah, the idea is it gets this cookbook, which I'll show in a second, and then it keeps making food tokens, and then it uses those food tokens to deal damage to our creatures. This, you know, depending on how many food tokens they're able to assemble, it's not necessarily as bad as Mayhem Devil or Yawgmoth, but still, a lot of times the decks that play this can usually utilize, you know, like synergies with the cookbook, so they usually end up with a lot of food tokens. So yeah, just being able to shut this thing down from being able to do this is because all we really care about, that we don't necessarily care about the 3/3 body that much. What we really care about is the ability to have our creatures deal 6 damage to themselves. And yeah, here's the Underworld Cookbook. Basically, Azmoran fetches up this, and then you know, it creates food tokens, and then Azmoran uses the food tokens to shoot things down, basically. Anyway, so yeah, Sorcerer Spyglass is a concession to those type of effects. Now, like again, this is kind of how I approach sideboards. Like I'm building my sideboard for my particular deck. I'm not just shoving in cards that look powerful. I'm selecting particular cards that help shore up particular weaknesses that my deck has. And I like Sorcerer Spyglass because I really like seeing people's hands. I could play Pithing Needle, I could play Friction Revoker, although Friction Revoker is awfully vulnerable, and non-infect body is not exactly the highest priority thing. So I'm basically kind of limiting this to Pithing Needle and Sorcerer Spyglass. And while Pithing Needle is cheaper, and there's a lot to be said about that, I think Sorcerer Spyglass gains a lot of extra points from being able to see the opponent's hand. And honestly, in Infect, it's almost worth an entire card just to be able to see their hands. Like, I wouldn't end up playing, like, you know, a Glasses of Urza, or I forget. There's like a card that allows you to see the opponent's hand. I would not necessarily play a card like that just to see their hand, but it is almost worth an entire card just to see the opponent's hand in this deck, because knowing when to go for it is so huge. And Sorcerer Spyglass, I'll gladly pay that extra mana. I'm not necessarily always paying the extra mana in order to shut down something that I don't know about in their hand, although that does come up sometimes. But sometimes just, you know, Sorcerer Spyglassing, naming something that's on the battlefield that I have to stop, and then just getting a peek at their hand. Like, a lot of times I'm more than willing to pay that extra mana to get that peek at what's going on. So maybe I know that I can go for it the following turn, or I know that I'm pretty safe, and maybe maybe if I just hold up 1 more mana for 1 extra pump, protection spell, I should be good. Yeah, and then of course Beast Within. Beast Within could be Dismember. It could be. It used to be actually in most of my lists. It used to be Spatial Contortion, but Spatial Contortion was only possible back when I used to play Cathedral of War, which is a pretty fun card, and it's definitely possible that we see that again. Now, of course, actually, I just realized this should not be called 12. This should not be called 12 Exalted Infect. I'll just call this Infect, mostly green Infect. I could call it 8 Exalted Infect, but let's just call it Infect. Because of course we're not playing Cathedral War, so it's actually just Infect, or 8 Exalted Infect. But yeah, we can't play Spatial Contortion with only 4 consistent colorless sources, and so like that's the thing. Honestly, Spatial Contortion would probably be the ideal slot here, because it is also kind of a pseudo pump spell, and it does come up more than you'd think. But honestly, I've also played Beast Within a decent amount. It's probably the second most played creature removal spell I play, besides Spatial Contortion. Spatial Contortion, if you have like, effectively we used to have 12 colorless sources because we had 4 Inkmoth, 4 Cathedral of Wars, and then again 4 Sylvan Scryings usually to go get Inkmoth. So I count basically Sylvan Scrying as a colorless source, and so at 12 colorless sources, Spatial Contortion was definitely a possibility. But without that, I think Beast Within is the second best option, and sometimes, depending on the needs of my deck, it might even be better. Notably, we're not playing Ghost Quarter here in this particular version, and that's a conscious decision that I think I'm okay with. And that means that it is nice to have the ability to interact with opposing lands. Like against Tron in particular, actually, a lot of times this deck will be able to... because this deck is almost guaranteed to win on turn 3. So a lot of times if you can get a turn 1 Hierarch, and then turn 2 Beast Within, ideally on their upkeep, so they can't attack with it that turn, but Beast Within like one of their Tron lands, as long as you have like an Inkmoth or something, or in this particular build, we've also got these Sajiri Steps that can, hopefully give protection from our own beasts and then just crash through. But either way, the idea is basically we can race our own beast token pretty easily, and we've got enough ways to get around our beast token that I think we're fairly okay with that. So, but actually, there is actually a solid case to be made for Beast Within over even Spatial Contortion. And Dismember for that matter. And by the way, the main thing I don't like about Dismember is that I think we're kind of priced into playing 4 Horizon Canopies in this particular version so that we can consistently cast Lurrus. And of course, we just lose way too much life with Dismember. And honestly, this Infect deck, it kind of trades life points a lot to try to like race, basically. Like a lot of games are basically just straight up races where we're just ignoring what's going on the ground and then just trying to race with Inkmoth Nexus. So obviously, Dismember is a little counterproductive in that it helps us, lose the race. It's not that bad because obviously Beast Within, the Beast token, can also, result in us losing the race. But sometimes we can use some grounders like some leftover Glistenerals or Necropedes or something to, buy us a little more time. But with Dismember, we just straight up lose the life. And yeah, but anyway, one of the main reasons actually why I think there's a decent argument for using Beast Within over even Spatial Contortion if we could support it. And this is kind of unique to Infect, but like there are so many different cards that could royally screw us over in Infect. There's Pithing Needle effects. I mean, heck, even Serrated Arrows. Well, I guess I forgot to show Pithing Needle, but it's basically the same thing as Sorcerer Spyglass, just 1 mana. But here it is. Why it's taking so long to pull up? Yeah, it's Pithing Needle. Again, same thing as Sorcerer Spyglass. You can, most of the time, don't name Inkmoth Nexus, and I can't activate it anymore and turn it into a creature. But, yeah, so there's a Pithing Needle is obviously a problem. There's also, like I said, even like some janky old school tech like this here. Like Serrated, what is it? Serrated Arrows. This is an oldie that was played a lot in like really old Magic. This is technically modern legal. I think this was replanted at Time Sprawl or something. Nobody really plays it. Although that means maybe I might try to resurrect it. You never know. Yeah, I mean, I put a -1 on counter actually, so it's not really that bad. The main problem is it costs frickin' 4 mana. But like honestly, the effect is not that bad. It is a nice little colorless, and it is a nice little kind of quasi removal type option that other colors besides like red and black and whatnot can play, particularly like green. I think this was played in decks like green and blue in the past that really did not have access to a lot of good removal. But yeah, so like even something janky like this actually is a big problem for us. These -1/-1 counters can be a real big problem. But also one of the main things is like freaking Plague Engineer. This is one of the biggest problems here. The problem is that when they did their creature type update, they made all of these infect creatures instead of like an insect and instead of like an elf. Now this is a Phyrexian elf warrior, Phyrexian insect, and now this becomes a Phyrexian Blinkmoth artifact creature. I don't know why they did that, but since they made everything like Blinkmoth tribal for infect, I mean since they made everything like Phyrexian tribal, Plague Engineer basically shuts down our entire deck, which is a big problem. Obviously, we can try to get there with normal damage with the Hierarchs, but it's just not really where we want to be, to say the least, or with Lurrus. But yeah, Plague Engineer, I think we really want an answer. And Beast Within is nice because we can bring it in the blind, and there's a lot we can do with it. We can try to mess with their mana, like if they leave like only 2 mana at the end of the turn, and like we blow up a mana, then we only have to hold up like 1 removal, one protection spell instead of 2. We can also like also if we're like low on creatures, sometimes we can blow up our own land and try to win with normal damage with the Beast token that we make. It can hit anything, even like an Iona Shield of Emeria. That's, well, obviously it's probably naming green, so not the best example. This can hit like an Arcana Cruelty. This can hit like basically anything. So that is, that is pretty good. But like the reason why I like Beast with, oh yeah, here's another one too. Yeah, this is another nasty one. Knight of Soul's Betrayal. Not every deck plays this. Actually, this is kind of specifically anti-infect tech that you see sometimes when infect becomes really popular. But yeah, like this card is a big problem. I mean, this even shuts off our Hierarch, so it obviously it affects their creatures too. But this is usually played in decks that either have larger creatures or just don't play that many creatures at all. But yeah, it's pretty nasty. It basically, as long as this is on the table, basically we just can't win. I guess we're all in on Lurrus, which you can't even use the Hierarchs for help in casting it. We just have to cast it off of Canopies and Sejiri Steps at that point. But yeah, a card like Beast Within, its stock goes way up when you have to have a lot of flexible answers to like possibly a lot of different things. They could be bringing in Pithing Needle. They could be bringing in, Knight of Soul's Betrayal. They could be bringing Plague Engineer. They could be bringing in Blood Moon. I mean, of course, we all know Blood Moon from our red deck. But like, yeah, heck, they could even be bringing in. They could even be bringing. Here's another thing too. Like they could be bringing in, if they're a red deck, either Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon. Both of which is our big problem because they shut up our Inkmoth Nexus, and we don't actually play that many forests, believe it or not. So Beast Within is nice because whether they're bringing in actual Blood Moon or Magus of the Moon, Beast Within can hit either one just the same. So that's always nice. Anyway, I think that's kind of it for the green deck. The rest of these sideboards are definitely much more similar to each other. So I guess I'll go then to the deck that I'm probably third most famous with for playing at this point, is this mono black deck. And yeah, and of course, I've already gone over Chalice of the Void, but yeah, let's briefly go over Ratchet Bomb because we don't necessarily see Ratchet Bomb as often, but it does show up sometimes. Like it's not in my most recent version of Merfolk, but it very well could easily find its way back in at some point. And even though it shuts off Obosh, it still could easily find its way into red deck wins, into Obosh red. But yeah, Ratchet Bomb is super helpful in this particular deck because we basically don't have a way to deal with artifacts and enchantments. And honestly, Ratchet Bomb is just really awesome because it just does so much. It deals with artifacts and enchantments, and actually much better than you'd think. I might even play this over like actual artifact or enchant. Like if there was a black disenchant, I might even still play Ratchet Bomb over it because it's just so versatile. But yeah, especially since we don't play answers to artifacts or enchantments, it's really nice to have them. but also sometimes we can just deal with swarms of tokens, swarms of like 1-drops. It's just super versatile, and yeah, particularly in like mid-range decks. Most of our decks don't necessarily play a ton of 1-drops, so definitely Ratchet Bomb, pretty good. I mean, of course, you can deal with 2-drops, you can deal with a lot of things, but I think it's best when it's dealing with 0-drops or 1-drops. Yeah, and I guess, I get asked sometimes, like, what's Necromentia for? Basically, Necromentia is for, like, Scape Shift or Amulet Titan, or, like, decks that are trying to go all in on basically one card. Yeah, I mean, you could possibly bring it in other places, but, like, you really need, like, this is kind of, there's really no other way sometimes to deal with problematic kind of one-card combos, if you will. I mean, with multi-card combos, a lot of times some of them, involve cards that cost, like, 1 or 2 mana, and in that case, Chalice of the Void can be pretty good, but yeah, Necromentia is for those like 1-card combos like Scape Shift, as Chalice of the Void ain't going to do much against that, or or Amulet Titan, where you just got to name Titan, otherwise the Titans just get you. But yeah, and I also, like, in this particular deck, yes, I think Lithophone Blight makes the most sense. It's the hardest hate against Urza Saga because it just kills it and draws a card. It can also deal with things like Valakut, Valakut the Molten Pinnacle, or Celestial Colonnade, or any number of problematic lands, which unfortunately Break the Ice can't. Like, there was a lot of hype around Break the Ice. I mean, and I bought 4 when it came out, and probably it reduced in value. There was a lot of hype in this card, and I think this is a pretty decent option to have in your arsenal. The main problem is that it doesn't hit stuff like Valakut the Molten Pinnacle. It doesn't hit Celestial Colonnade. It doesn't hit Castle Vantress. It doesn't hit like opposing Castle Lochthwains. Like, there's just a lot of lands you need to hit that this doesn't hit. And also, like, when you deal with an Urza Saga, it doesn't also draw you a card like Lithophone Blight. Like, the thing about Lithophone Blight is it looks, or Lithoform Blight, excuse me, not Lithofoam, Lithoform Blight. But yeah, Lithoform Blight, it's better than it looks. I mean, like, I'm basically bringing this in to shut off abilities for like utility lands, including Urza Saga. I'm not bringing this in basically to color screw them or anything. So, and I think at what this does, it's really not bad. It basically deals with like a utility land and draws a card. I mean, this ain't no Spreading Seas because it doesn't color screw them, but I mean, it's a Spreading Seas only for abilities. It's actually way better than it looks. Anyway, yeah, and of course, this is what I'm on now for mono black. I ditched the fetch lands for now, and we'll see if this works out. But so far, at least in the most recent league I played, these 2 Horizon lands actually did enable Fatal Push enough, at least, when I needed them. More so in the later game. And it's kind of nice that these can sit around sometimes, as opposed to, well, I mean, I guess fetch lands can too, but yeah. Anyway, and yes, this is easy prey in this particular deck. It's really nice to always have some piece of removal for early stuff, but also just be able to cycle this when either you're facing something like a control deck that doesn't necessarily play many creatures, or when you just run out of creatures to target and you got to just like actually start getting to one of your Haymaker cards like Liliana or something. So yeah, I mean, I've been really, this was a card that I wasn't necessarily expecting to. I had it on my mind to try it, but like it's actually way better than it looks. It's also kind of a lot of times your turn 2 play. In a nutshell, you either kill something 2 or less, or you cycle. It's better than it looks, and it's just a role player basically in this deck. You always have to build your deck with your own deck in mind, not necessarily other decks. And something like this is just really good in a deck that really needs to control the early game. It can't let the early game slip away. But also, it really just helps transition in the later game where you try to take over with your 2-for-1s like Liliana, Gatekeeper, Turok, etc. Murderous Rider. Yeah, and by the way, also, like, as you may have noticed, I'm experimenting without the Luris package. It's mostly because I actually find that Murderous Rider is incredibly good, and I'm surprised this doesn't see more play actually in other black decks. I mean, the double black maybe is one thing, but like the ability to the ability to kill any creature is nice. Like, for example, being able to end of turn try to kill a Murktide, because sometimes like they got counter magic up. So ideally, we could sometimes like hold up Murderous Rider, like try to kill Murktide. They play Counterspell, then we like untap, play Liliana or Gatekeeper. Sometimes if we just have Liliana or Gatekeeper, it could be a little too taxing on us. Like this came about actually partially because I I lost a game to Isn't Murktide, which I never liked doing, and it was because I basically didn't have an instant speed way to kill Murktide, and I was like, man, if only I had an instant speed way to kill it, and then on my turn slam like a Gatekeeper or something, then I'd be in a much better shape. And you know, there was like Doomblade and stuff, but like I really like Murderous Rider because it's a kill spell and it's a creature, but also, aside from being able to kill anything, it's not restricted to even non-black. It also can kill any Planeswalker, which is huge because honestly, Planeswalkers are one of the biggest problems in this deck. And yeah, if anybody knows a better card that can basically deal with any Planeswalker, and is also pretty versatile, that can also be a 2/3 lifelink creature for like a decks like Burn or something, where like the lose 2 life is kind of a deal breaker. But yeah, I mean, I like it. It's actually it's a 2-for-1, and it's also just kind of as a 2/3 lifelinker, it's kind of what we want too. Like when you used to play Gifted Aetherborn, it's like a Gifted Aetherborn that's 1 more mana and doesn't have Death Touch. But yeah, anyway. And of course, Liliana the Veil. Everybody knows Liliana the Veil. This card, needless to say, does absolutely start taking over the game sometimes, depending on the matchup. But ultimately, it's kind of a glorified sack effect that also gains other value, kind of like Gatekeeper the Malakir. Most of the time, not gonna lie, Liliana is better if you're not playing Lurrus. If you are playing Lurrus, obviously you can still play Gatekeeper. But you know, I for a while I was playing Liliana instead of Gatekeeper, and I was like, man, if only I could fit another creature in here that 2-for-1 the opponent, but also wasn't like too clunky. Like if only there's. And I'm like, wait a minute, I can play Gatekeeper and Liliana. So anyway, I've actually been surprisingly liking it because you'd be surprised how many times I just play out like Gatekeeper as 2 mana, as a 2-mana 2/2. You know, where we just need to get the beats in. But it can also be like a full-fledged Liliana type effect. Well, like when we got this much creature removal, it's really nice that Gatekeeper is pretty flexible. Like you can either play it as just a quick 2/2 bear, or you can play it as like a 2-for-1 creature. I also really love Baronmoor in this deck because we really need like 24 lands to make sure that we don't. I mean, like the Lurrus version can get away with playing 20 because it plays a Mishra's Bauble, which helps us draw into other stuff, especially with the fetches, so we can like fetch, look at the top card of our library. If it's a non-land card, then we can like scry, you know, we can crack the fetch land to get a redraw. But obviously this deck we don't have Mishra's Bauble, so we can't really filter the top card of our library or anything. And we also don't get that extra draw. So I really like having 24 lands, but I like the way Baronmoor. I like the way it doesn't clog up our hand. One of the problems with playing 24 lands is sometimes we just end up with too many lands in our hand, and Baronmoor can always just cycle away, so we don't have to like take 3, 4, 5 damage from our Castle Lochthwain because we can't play out all the lands in our hand, you know. So that's always nice. Hive of the Eye Tyrant also surprisingly good, but you know, maybe the gameplay videos I have will show. One thing in particular that's nice is that we can get away with not playing. We don't play that many creatures, but one of the things about this, like for a while, I was actually kind of worried that this deck doesn't really have a lot of creatures with over 2, let alone 3 toughness. But one of the things I realized is actually Hive of the Eye Tyrant is actually a pretty decent kill spell, because in conjunction with Liliana, even if they've got a lot of lightning bolt effects, if you stick Liliana and it's upticking every turn, basically you can kind of ensure that they can't hold on to some type of bolt effect when you activate this, because you uptick and then you activate. So unlike the other cards, this actually kind of is a little, you know, can kind of get under removal if you got a Liliana, which is pretty nice. And also the Graveyard Hate is super relevant, better than it looks. We've got Relic of Progenitus here too. This actually used to be Neil Spellbomb. I actually haven't played a league with Relic instead of Neil Spellbomb, but I'm confident enough that it's basically it's probably just better than Neil Spellbomb. Very close, but it's probably better. I don't think I need to test that much because most of the time it's going to be basically doing the same thing anyway. But the main thing I like about Relic of Progenitus over Spellbomb in this deck, because again this goes to like building your sideboard and choosing cards that fit for your particular deck. But at first I liked Neil Spellbomb because, you know, like we can play a different type of effect that only black can play, and you can start cracking it on turn 1 even if you don't draw a card, and you can kill their entire graveyard. But like the thing about Relic, the problem with Neil Spellbomb is that it's targeted, and I realize that sometimes when they bring in Leyline of Sanctity, it's just kind of brutal, you know, being shut off both from playing discard and from playing and from using my Graveyard Hate on them. So unfortunately, I think Relic's gotta take it, because just because it's just a little, it just makes I think Leyline Void just a little too brutal. So that's why I think Relic of Progenitus still ends up taking this slot. We definitely like it, that's for sure. Yeah, and I think that leads us to the last deck, which is Mono White Stoneblade, also known as Blinkblade. Man, I tell you, I actually was trying to really make solid improvements. I was actually trying real hard for a 5-0 before the last season ended, but unfortunately, I could not finish last season getting a 5-0 with this deck. I got very close a number of times. I know this deck can get a 5-0. It definitely can. But anyway, I think I found the version that just feels like it's got the most game to it. And yes, there's no Aether Vial. This is one of the reasons why I was trying around with that Aether Vial-less Merfolk deck. Yeah. So feast your eyes on this. But in the meantime, once again, you'll notice that we still have Chalice, we still have Relic. And yeah, that's for the same reason as these cards are in our other deck. Particularly in this deck, though, we need help against Cascade. And while I do like the way cards like Sanctum Prelate, or actually Archon of Emeria is the more common card, which I played for a long time. I love Archon, but I love Archon of Emeria. It makes it so players can't cast more than one spell each turn, and also makes non-basics come into play tapped, which a lot of times they do anyway, so most of the time the first ability is the main part that you play this for. But while Archon is great because a lot of combos essentially require playing more than one spell each turn, so can't really complain too much about Archon. The fact of the matter is that I don't know of any other card in Mono White that can prevent any Cascade from going off before turn 3, because if they go first, then they can play a Cascade spell before I can tap 3 mana. So I kind of need something that can stop Cascade before their turn 3, before my turn 2. Or before my turn 3, rather. So I think Chalice of the Void is it. I mean, I could play like Thalia or something to slow them down, but as a sideboard card, I want cards that outright stop it before turn 3, really. And yes, I know there's Deafening Silence. Where is Deafening Silence? Huh. I don't have my Stony Silences anymore, apparently. I guess it's been a while since I needed them. Here it is, Deafening Silence. Now, the problem is somebody recommended this, but see, here's the problem. Shardless Agent is a creature. So when they cast Shardless Agent, they haven't cast a non-creature spell this turn, so their Cascade doesn't get shut off. It's kind of a big problem. I hate that. It's the same problem with Aethersworn Canonist. And I love Aethersworn Canonist. This card was doing a lot of work for me in Legacy, and like a Legacy Mono White Stoneblade type deck. Actually, I think I was onto something in a while for Legacy. This card was delivering me a lot of wins. I don't know that it's probably not the same in Legacy anymore, but like this card definitely was way better, a way better hate bear even in the main than I think people gave it credit for. So I have a soft spot on this card. This card was I really liked what this card did for me. The problem is though, once again it says non-artifact spell. So Deafening Silence says each player basically can't cast additional non-creature spells, and this card says can't cast additional artifact spells. Deafening Silence says non-creature spells. But guess what is an artifact as well? Guess what is also an artifact? Yes, Shardless Agent. So yeah. Anyway, so that's one of the reasons why I basically am playing this. You got to think through these things. This particular deck actually I think is a good case study in why I play certain sideboard cards. So I don't think I particularly need Ratchet Bomb in this sideboard, and the reason why is because I really like what Settle the Wreckage does, because Settle the Wreckage, like we honestly don't need much artifact and enchantment hate because we've got Skyclave Apparition, we've got Blaststone actually, and I can get to that in a moment. But like, you know, talking about the sideboard first. But since like our main deck, I think, has most of the bases covered as far as like individual artifacts and enchantments, and we don't really need like Ratchet Bomb for them. I really like the way Settle the Wreckage can turn the tide against a lot of big creatures attacking, like in Timor Living End or Timor Rhinos, or even just like, you know, Murktide. Sometimes you can even get 2 Murktides, although let's not get ahead of ourselves. But yeah, even if we can Settle the Wreckage on 1 Murktide, that's not bad. But sometimes we can nag a Murktide attacking with like a Dragon Rage Channeler and like a Ragavan together or something like that, and it's just really, really sweet. Yeah, this is like more hate against some of these Cascade type decks, but also against like decks that try to swarm you, and they will run into basics basically. Yeah, and I do like this better than something like Wrath of God, because like a lot of decks like Timor Living End and Timor Rhinos, they put a lot of power in play at the end of your turn. So, you know, you don't really have an opportunity sometimes to Wrath of God before they attack. So I think Settle the Wreckage really it covers multiple bases. Let's put it that way. That's what I like about it. And I'm opting to play Sanctum Prelate in the 3-mana Hate Bear slot instead of Archon of Emeria. And I think that's because since I'm already playing Chalice of the Void for anti Cascade cards, since Settle the Wreckage also has pretty good effect against at least Timor Living End and Timor Rhinos, those Cascade decks. Although Timor Glimpse, like there are some Cascade decks that don't necessarily play like a lot of creatures, but still, Sanctum Prelate, I think since we're already like the negative to Sanctum Prelate is obviously that that they can shock it to kill it with like a dead gone or Stomp or Fire and Ice. But again, since we've got a lot of our other bases covered, I think we're okay with this. But I like Sanctum Prelate because there are some decks, like for example Mill, where we just really don't have a chance against it unless we can somehow shut off like both Tassa's Hideous Laughter and Fractured Sanity, which a lot of times can just finish us off pretty easily. So yeah, I think that makes, you know, for me at least, I think so far, I do like it. I could see myself going back to Archon, but I do like the way Sanctum Prelate covers a lot. Like basically Chalice can cover 1 and sometimes 2, but it can cover like 1 and 0. Yeah, I don't have an issue with killing any creature of any size because of Path and Solitude. Artifacts and enchantments 1 to 4, pretty easy with Skyclave, or 0 to 4, I guess. But Sanctum Prelate can name even higher numbers, 4, 5, 6, 7 sometimes, depending on what, like if you're worried about Ujin the Ineffable or Ujin the Spirit Dragon or whatever it may be, you can name that number and yeah, you can basically avoid a grisly fate. But yeah, well, if you want to see me actually pilot this this monstrosity, this nonsense right here, consider becoming a patron. If you want, though, you can PM me. Like, if you want to find me on Twitter or something, like that's, I think, a better way to private message than YouTube. Definitely private message me, because I'm definitely open. Like, if some of you just can't become a patron for whatever reason, you really want to see like a particular video or something with like one of my, like if you want to see like my most recent video or something, just PM me, and there's a decent chance I'll probably be able to just get you the link anyway. But yeah, anyway, just there's a lot to say about this, and it's almost already been like 50 minutes, so I want to wrap it up soon. But yeah, I mean, just kind of the idea here is let's just put it this way: the crux of the matter is that I found out that with 24 lands, I actually can accommodate a lot of colorless sources, because this deck, unlike Merfolk, does not actually have a super strict white requirement. So I could slip in effects like Blast Zone, which can really help a lot of utility, like deal with, like, for example, Torpor Orb, which almost shuts the deck down. And but yeah, I also like one of the kind of inspirations for playing this deck. Well, I mean, I did mess around with some different variations, but one of the reasons why I got kind of settled on this particular version was one of the biggest problems of playing Flicker Wisp without Aether Vial is you miss out on the ability to, to flicker other permanents or things at instant speed. But guess how you can do that? You can ephemerate it, and then you can get that instant speed flicker effect from Flicker Wisp, not through Aether Vial, but through ephemerate. And of course, Ephemerate just very good in general. Just, you know, you can draw multiple cards off Wall of Omens, get more clues with Raven Inspector, do the Solitude trick where you evoke it, and then before the evoke trigger resolves, Ephemerate it, so it comes back, exiles another creature, and it doesn't leave, you know, the battlefield. But yeah, suffice it to say, that's kind of how I approach sideboarding with these decks. I guess briefly just with this deck, you know, this like the Merfolk deck's still a little experimental, so I'm not going to say too much more. Other than, like, you don't see Ratchet Bomb in here because I just think this deck just really has tokens, you know, handled just pretty good with like Repeal and Brazen Borrower and Harbinger of the Tides, at least against creature tokens. Like, I don't think we necessarily need Ratchet Bomb to clean up. And yeah, so, you know, sometimes you don't see particular cards because they might be stronger. Like, the deck covers those particular areas. Yeah, and like, so one of the reasons why, and just I guess really briefly, one of the reasons why I play if you see me playing Blood Moon in the main, it's because I'm playing against decks like, for example, Death Shadow or Jund or certain like certain mid-range or control-ish type decks that have red at their disposal, so they can easily Lightning Bolt Mages, but are also very vulnerable to a Moon effect. And Blood Moon's better against them, but of course Mages of the Moon is better against Tron because it's also a clock. It's better against Azorius control because they don't have Lightning Bolt, but it also gets around Force and Negation, and also as a clock, of course. But yeah, anyway, so all of these are considerations to how you build the deck or which card you choose to be in the main or the sideboard. I guess where we're gonna leave off is you know, where I feel like the meta is going right now, because I got a little feel for the new meta with the new Innistrad block getting released. I think the card that is going to be like the MVP, I think, of the new set so far appears to be Faithful Mending. This is the card I've been the most impressed with, seeing people play, which of course didn't exist before. This is very close to Faithless Looting. It's only one more mana, but let me tell you, the ability to gain 2 life, both off the original and the flashback, it's very annoying against the types of decks I like to play. So in some ways, it's even better than Faithless Looting. It's also an instant, so it's not. I still don't think it's quite as good as Faithless Looting, but it's actually surprisingly close. So suffice it to say, Phoenix decks are back. Reanimator decks are better than ever. Like, decks that want to use the graveyard, as long as they can support blue and white as well, in addition to whatever other colors they want to play, Faithless Mending is the real deal. So it is possible we may want to up more graveyard hate going forward, but for the time being, full disclaimer, I haven't necessarily played Obosh Hammer that much in the new meta yet. I plan to get to that, but I can tell you at least when I'm playing Merfolk, the combination of Relic and Chalice seems to hit the Phoenix decks pretty hard. So I haven't been particularly. Sometimes they can get pretty nasty game 1 wins against you, but now that the red deck wins also has Chalice and Relic, particularly Relic in the main, I think we got a pretty good shot. And because I think this deck has a lot of advantages over Merfolk in that matchup, being able to play like Seasoned Pyromancer, being able to like zap the birds for like 1 mana instead of having to like bounce them and stuff. I could be wrong, but you know, but it's also got Relic in the main, so that's pretty sweet. But yeah, so I know that there's definitely a lot more strategy content, and this video ended up becoming about an hour anyway. But you know, but full disclaimer, I didn't necessarily I haven't necessarily done a ton of prep work. You know, I just wanted to kind of go over like what I'm playing now, and you know, also just briefly discuss, I guess, what particular cards that you see a lot in my sideboards for all my different decks do for me, and why they've been such mainstays. Anyway, I hope this video has been good enough. I do plan to get to like a more in-depth strategy on particular topics instead of just like an overview of the decks and sideboards and things I'm playing. But yeah, until next time, definitely glad for all of you watching. I think I'll leave it there. Definitely, if you want to see my most recent, if you want to see what I'm at right now, I try to keep my Patreon relatively. I try to keep it about as up to date as possible. Basically, I try not to let it go like longer than a week or so without uploading. You know, like what I've been playing. I do have some uploads. I do have some games I was playing over the weekend that I hope to be uploading soon. I may not be able to upload them tonight, but yeah. But anyway, take care, everybody. And I definitely look forward to going over some of those suggestions. There were some really good suggestions last time. I'm gonna get to them, and I hope you all have a wonderful week. Take care. Oh yeah, and sorry this didn't go up on Sunday like usual. Just sometimes things happen on like Saturday night, and I just got caught up. So I'm gonna have this go up Monday morning instead. So hope you all enjoy, and see you all. Hope you enjoy the videos that I've got coming up this week, and then see you next week for the next general topic and shout out video. Take care.